My parents never told me that my real mom was a celebrity. My life, when recollected, was pretty ordinary. My parents, Susan and Tom, were decent, trustworthy folks. We had everything we needed, a peaceful house and a calm place, and love, support, and stability from them. I even thought that them being overprotective at times was a little much, especially with them always warning me not to dig too much into their past, but I guess that all makes sense now. They were just my mom and dad to me. I was the only child in the family, and I think it is safe to say that I was their entire world. I was homeschooled rather than attending regular school until high school, which was odd in my opinion. But them saying that they wanted to give me a more refined education made complete sense to me. They were always careful who I associated with, and often tried to manipulate friendships I had with kids at the park or neighborhood parties. Oh well, I thought that was a part of them trying to mask their concern for me. Curiosity filled my mind as I got older. An example would be that there were no pictures of me as a baby. When I inquired, the answers were inconsistent. I was told that there was a flood in their old house or the pictures were lost during a move. Additionally, I realized that my mom became overly emotional every time I brought up her family. She never spoke of her parents or siblings, only stating that they were gone and that it was a painful topic for her. My dad would shoot her a warning look whenever I asked too many questions, so I slowly started to drop it. However, there was one incident that would stick in my mind. Around 10 years old, my family and I were walking through a department store when a random stranger walked up to us. She was a middle-aged woman who seemed a bit over the top and trying to appear younger than she was. She looked at me wide-eyed before turning to my mother and saying, "She looks just like her." My mother snatched my hand and pulled me away roughly, leaving the woman looking completely confused. My mom wrote it off as the woman being mistaken when I tried to ask her about it later. Those moments did fade over time, especially once I started focusing on school, friends, and then college. I was leading an ordinary life, or so I thought. It was not until I reached my early 20s that the puzzle pieces started making sense. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, you may miss out, but congratulations. You're able to see and hear the most intriguing stories as you wish. During a college break, I felt quite nostalgic. After having a look in the attic searching for some old photo albums, I came across an old dusty trunk concealed behind some boxes. This was much more interesting than the family mementos I was looking for. I was home alone as my parents were out going on errands. I was reminiscing about the past, so I decided to start looking for pictures and other cool items my family possesses. After about an hour of searching, I was able to find the trunk, which was slowly giving me some clues. The lock was rusty, and with a little force, I was easily able to open it. Quite perplexing. Amongst the items inside, I was able to find stacks of letters, newspapers, and photographs that seemed to predetermine my future. As I stared deeply into one of the old newspapers, my heart started beating faster. It was as if the pictures and old newspapers were coming to life. The headline stated, "Rising star Sarah Matthews gives birth to baby girl." The photograph with this headline had a striking resemblance to me. Just in the picture, I could see a woman with striking blonde hair along with a baby swaddled in a pink blanket. I felt a shiver creep down my spine. Sarah Matthews was a name that felt familiar. She was a well-known actress back in the 1980s through 1990s, remembered for her stunning roles in major movie productions. She was arguably the best example of Hollywood beauty and a household name at the time. However, she vanished from the media scene without a word towards the end of the 90s, which fueled endless conjectures regarding her mysterious disappearance. The date on the newspaper was roughly the same as the period I was born. What was going on? Why would my parents have this? As I kept searching through the chest, I began to pull out more magazines and newspapers, all of which had Sarah Matthews featured. Some of them were glad and celebrated her fame working as an actress, while others were sadly covering her retirement and the controversies that came later. What got my attention was the bottom of the box, where I came across a certain document. It was my birth certificate. Except this document did not contain my mom's name. Rather, it stated Sarah Matthews as my mother. There was also no name placed under father's name. I leaned back and I felt like the world was tiptoeing above my head. Sarah Matthews was my mother? What kind of woman did I grow up with? My head ran with thousands of thoughts, and all of them bewildered me. If Sarah Matthews was my biological mother, who were Tom and Susan? And for goodness' sake, why did they decide to keep this secret from me? I wasted no time and confronted them the moment my parents returned home. Who is Sarah Matthews? I demanded. I held up the birth certificate and the newspaper, my hands trembling. They went as pale as ghosts. Stunned into silence, for a moment they just stood there. Susan, or should I say mother, finally broke the silence and spoke. Her voice trembled profoundly. "Where did you find that?" "In the attic," I yelled. "You've been hiding this from me my entire life." "Why?" Tom took a step forward, placing a hand on Susan's shoulder as if trying to calm her. "We need to sit down," he said quietly. We shifted into the living room, and they took the couch facing me. Susan inhaled deeply, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, she replied. Sarah Matthews is your real mother. But it's not exactly how you think. What do you mean? I questioned, shaky on my breath. Why would you have to lie to me regarding something this critical? Tom coughed. We didn't lie. We just did not choose to share the whole truth. I found myself feeling furious. That is lying, I shouted. And I do not understand how you cannot see it. Susan gazed pleadingly at me. We did it to protect you. From what? I contested. From the life she led, Susan said, her voice trembling. She was a star, someone who was always on the front. There is beauty, as idealized and romanticized as it seems, but there is a lot of pain underneath it. Drugs, scandals, trauma bonds. When she found herself pregnant, it was clear to her that bringing a child into her world would not be ideal. In order to keep you away from everything, she chose to flee. I stared at her, trying to comprehend what she's saying. So, she simply gave me to an orphanage? Tom shook his head. It wasn't that simple. I'm aware that Sarah had genuine affection towards you. Even if it was misguided, she adored you in an unhealthy manner. We were friends with her. You do not usually make alliances for the life of your children with people you barely trust. But she gave us you, so we could help escape the mess she caused. Why not tell me? I said, a wave of anger fueled by heartbreak rippling through me. Why not for so long? Just tell me. Susan wiped away tears, possibly regretting opening this Pandora box. For whatever diabolical reason each of us has, we had assumed is what's best for you. She was not a good person, and I fear the mess she caused you to endure. You deserve a proper life. I lifted my gaze to see the birth certificate in my hand. A legal document that was purposely missed in deception and was shredded to fit their narrative. What happened to her? I inquired, my words coming out in the form of a soft whisper. Before speaking, Susan had a glance with Tom. She died when you were 4. An overdose. An uncomfortable silence inched itself into the room. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of my lungs. All these years, I had been living an elaborate lie, and the truth that surfaced was a million times more horrifying than I could anticipate. My mother was a well-known actress who had succumbed to addiction, and in the friendship of my parents I was left to wonder why a family set of friends completely obliterated my story. Those subsequent weeks were highly overwhelming emotionally. My folk, or, as I now refer to them, the parental units Tom and Susan, tried soothing me, but I found it best to withdraw. I felt like a foolishly deceived individual, and with every new day, I realized I was indeed shackled. Stuck to this life, kept in the attic, I began to dig through the trunk and piece together my biological mother's life with the hope of eventually escaping. There were letters served from Sarah to Tom and Susan explaining her journeys as a famous actress while urgently detailing a wish for my safety. Her fears of losing self while wandering in the glitz of Hollywood filled my lungs to the brim. The most impactful letter for me was one written shortly before her death. In it, she was expressing her love for me alongside her wishes for me to grow up happy and free from the burdens that had consumed her. She thanked Tom and Susan for taking me in and gives me a chance at a normal life, which she believed she could never provide. There was a lot of grief that I felt from the mother I never met. I also felt anger at the choices that she made, which brought tremendous sadness for the person she had become. I began to understand Tom and Susan in the choices they made, but I still had never-ending betrayal that was hard to swallow. To understand Sarah, I had to go beyond her and comprehend the world around her. I started looking up details regarding her career, including watching her films and reading pieces on her fame and downfall. I contacted people who had known her, like former co-stars, friends, and her agents, hoping to assemble the bits and pieces I had to form a more cohesive narrative of Sarah Matthews. From what I gathered, Sarah Matthews was incredibly multifaceted. She was an artistic and stunning woman, but also a fiercely independent and deeply troubled individual caught in the turmoil of fame that inevitably devoured her. I once picked up a response from a woman named Grace, who had once been an aide to Sarah during her peak. She was willing to meet me at a cafe during the weekends. When I got to the cafe, I saw a woman with warm eyes waiting for me, a grandmother figure. She looked at me both surprised and to a certain extent, recognized me. "You resemble her so much," Grace whispered to me when we sat down. "I appreciate you meeting with me," I said, doing my best not to overflow with feelings. "I want to learn more about her, about Sarah." Grace nodded. "She's a remarkable woman, and there's a lot going for her, but she did have her issues. The industry on her was phenomenal. She began with wide eyes and optimistic attitudes, only for it to collapse on her slowly, over time." "Did she mention me?" I asked, uncertain. "All the time," Grace chuckled, her gaze less hostile. "You were the love of her life, but she was petrified at the same time. She didn't want you to be a part of that world. She wanted to safeguard you from the world that ensnared her." Tears began to blur my vision. Why didn't she just walk away from it all? Simple. Fame is a drug. Grace let out a sigh. It drags you in, and next thing you know, you are super glued to your spot. Sarah tried to escape many times, but there were always contracts, people who depended on her, responsibilities. She was in too deep. Did she really die from an overdose? I asked, desperate to hear the truth from someone who was there. Grace looked downright pained. Yes, she had an addiction problem. The pressure, the media attention. It was too much. In the end, it destroyed her. I nodded, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. She wrote letters to my parents, I said, about hoping I would get to live a normal life. She did, Grace confirmed. She loved you more than anything, and it was the hardest decision she ever made. But she knew she had to do it. The last few steps away from the cafe were energizing. The woman whom I've never met, my biological mother, had made an extraordinarily tragic decision in order to give me the shattered chance at a life she thought she was unable to provide. It wasn't that Tom and Susan had decided to become parents out of hate, cruelty, or fraud. They did so out of love and a need to fulfill what Sarah wanted. I went back home that evening, and as I walked in, I found Tom and Susan sitting in the living room waiting for me. They had been giving me space, giving me a chance to take everything in. Taking a deep breath, I sat down across from them. I spoke to Grace, I said in a low voice. She said she knows a lot about Sarah. Tears formed in Susan's eyes. We wanted to tell you, she said. But when we talked about how it will affect you, I realized that we were not really helping you. We were trying to protect you. But, I know, I replied. I understand why you thought this was protecting me. But the fact is, I had to deal with this situation on my own. Tom, looking increasingly earnest in his words, leaned forwards. We love you. We adore you even. Don't forget, you are our daughter, no matter what. I know, I said again. I was starting to believe what they were claiming. But I also have to know who I am. Who Sarah was. With time, I came to understand who I was over the next few months. I continued to explore Sarah's life, but I also started to mend the gaps formed where I was disconnected from Tom and Susan. I remembered that I once thought that they were hiding the truth from me, but in reality on their end they have sacrificed a lot while keeping a stable life for me. They suffered, knowing the trade-off between Sarah's struggles and the burden of keeping the secret. The first time I visited Sarah's grave, I remember it was comparatively modest. The grave was situated at a small cemetery located on the outskirts of Los Angeles. While standing there, I felt so much empathy and grief for the mother that I never knew, and it's like I felt so much gratitude for the life that she had bestowed upon me. On that day, when I went to pay my respects, I remember placing a bouquet of lilies on the grave and whispering the words I had been keeping to myself all this time. Thank you for loving me in your own way. On my way back home, I recall that my last stop was at Tom and Susan's place where I sat down with them. And it was then that I was able to talk freely. Free about Sarah and all the things that had happened in her life. The decisions that they took and how as a family we were going to move on. That meeting was tough, no doubt, but it was a way to begin. Over time, I came to terms and accepted all aspects of my identity. I am the daughter of a famous actress who fought her demons and the parents that had adopted and cared for me. My life is a beautiful yet painful tapestry of mysteries and sacrifices intertwined with truths. I started writing about Sarah's life, not as the tabloid star she was made to be, but as a woman who faced insurmountable pressure and made a heart-wrenching decision to protect her child. It was my way of paying homage to her while coming to terms with the legacy she left me. During this journey, I learned that family is not just about blood or the skeletons in the closet. It's about the decisions made, the affection given, and the ability to face the uncomfortable truths. My parents, Tom and Susan, provided me with the life that Sarah was unable to, and for that, I was thankful. They weren't perfect, and neither was I. We were just a family, overly flawed but bound together by love and the various secrets that compelled us to move on.